Hello, everyone. We're going to allow people to join into the meeting and we will get started in a few minutes. Hello, everyone. I am Felicia Graham with the City of Dayton Department of Water. And on behalf of the Ohio Stormwater Association, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, the Chagrin River Watershed Partners Model Erosion and Sediment Control and Comprehensive Stormwater Codes. The Ohio Stormwater Association is dedicated to advancing the management of stormwater and related natural resources through education, leadership, watershed-based coordination, and technical assistance in Ohio. The association is led by a board of directors. Our president is Mark McCabe. The vice president is Kelly Kubander. The secretary is Regina Collins. The treasurer is Bob Lentz, and past president Kathy Wade Dorman. We invite you all to join the Ohio Stormwater Association, and you do that by choosing stormwater as your area of interest when you join the Water Management Association of Ohio. The Ohio Stormwater Association has 4 working committees: Education Committee, Marketing and Membership, Regulatory and Transportation. And today we will first have our speaker present, and then we will do questions and answers at the end. So just to tell you a little bit about our speaker, the Chagrin River Watershed Partners is a nonprofit.
Mayor Hunter, I'm in attendance.
Is a nonprofit organization that helps communities in the Lake Erie Basin avoid and address flooding, erosion,
Mayor Hunter, I'm in
quality
attendance.
problems. Keely Davidson Bennett is a senior project manager with 8 years of experience with Chagrin River Watershed Partners. She has managed research projects studying the effectiveness of bioretention and permeable pavement on poorly draining soils, Ohio stormwater utilities, and local regulations to protect natural resources. She has assisted many communities with adopting and implementing stormwater and erosion and sediment control codes. Keely has an MS, Master in Science in Environmental Science from the Ohio State University and a BA in Biology from Hiram College. So I will stop sharing my screen, and then Keely, you can share and we will take questions at the end, and you can, during the presentation, please use the chat and pose your questions there, and then Keely will address them at the end of our presentation.
All right, can everyone see my presentation now?
Yes, looks good. We can hear
Great.
you.
Thank you. So thank you again for inviting me to speak on our model erosion, sediment, and comprehensive stormwater codes. I'm Keely Davidson Bennett, and I apologize in advance if my voice sounds a little rough today. I'm getting over a cold. So luckily, my colleague, Kimberly Brewster Shuffleton, is also in attendance, and if needed, she'll take over for me for a few slides, and then we'll get through this presentation anyway. If you're not familiar with Chagrin River Watershed Partners, or CRWP as we're also known, we are a nonprofit organization that was formed in 1996 by the communities that drain to the Chagrin River watershed, which includes portions of Portage, Geauga, Cuyahoga, and Lake counties. We currently have 36 members representing 91% of the land area of the Chagrin River watershed. We're supported by member dues, grants, and donations, and we provide technical assistance on land use planning to communities to minimize flooding, erosion, and water quality issues. And we also focus on innovative, cost-effective solutions for communities and landowners. On this slide, you'll see our list of our 2021 members. These are the 36 members that I previously mentioned. We really appreciate the support and relationships that we have with all of our member communities, park districts, and counties. We also appreciate the support of our sponsoring organizations. I'll show you all of their names here. CRWP provides ordinance adoption and implementation assistance to communities, as well as natural resource planning assistance. We also assist communities and landowners with project planning, grant writing, and project management for stream and wetland restoration, park improvement, and stormwater management projects. The pictures on this slide are an example of one project that we helped with project planning, grant writing, and project management for, and that is a WRSP project that involved the acquisition of the Aurora Country Club. The top picture is what that property looked like pre-restoration. The bottom picture is what that property looked like after we helped the city of Aurora get a WRSP to acquire the property and restore over a mile of the Aurora branch and a tributary to it. We also provide training for community staff and professionals, education and engagement on watershed stewardship, and applied research to address flooding, erosion, stormwater, and natural resource management concerns. And now with our partner watershed organizations through the Central Lake Erie Basin Collaborative, CRWP is providing assistance to communities as far west as Sandusky and as far east as Conneaut. CRWP really benefits from our trusted relationships with our member communities. Part of the reason we've been able to establish these trusted relationships include the following. The first point is that CRWP is structured with a community membership model. Each of the members in CRWP have a seat on our board of directors. We've also been working with most of these communities for more than 20 years. For some communities we've been working with since our founding 25 years ago. We work closely with a variety of city, county, and village and township departments, including mayors, councils, planning and zoning boards, the legal departments, the engineering staff. So we have a broad view of various perspectives in each of the communities that we work in. Many of our communities consider us technical experts, and they involve us in development and conservation decisions. CRWP maintains a suite of model codes covering a variety of topics. If you're not familiar with the term model code, a model code is an example ordinance or zoning resolution that is a starting place for communities to use to enact their own regulations. So some communities choose to adopt our models as written, others choose to use elements of our models and tailor them to their community. We always recommend that before anyone uses our model, they do a thorough read through with multiple community departments to make sure that the model as written meets the needs of the community and to make any changes needed to make the regulation work for the community. So today I'll be talking in great detail about stormwater management, erosion and sediment control, and riparian setbacks. But just to let everyone know, if you are a new MS4 and you need an illicit discharge detection and elimination ordinance, you can look at our model on our website. All of these model codes are available on our website, which is www.crwp.org. And once you get to our homepage, if you look at the options on the top, we have a what does CRWP do? And you can choose guide communities from the options. And if you choose that page, then model regulations will be one of your choices. And that is where you will find all of these model ordinances. So we have a model illicit discharge detection and elimination ordinance that prohibits discharges to MS4s and provides the authority for MS4s to conduct the inspections that they need to do as required by the MS4 permit. Our wetland setback code is similar to our riparian setback code that I'll be talking about in detail today. Like the riparian setback code, it helps to protect the free services that wetlands provide, many of which are similar to those that streams provide, such as flood storage and water quality benefits. And that model code calls for a 75-foot setback from category 2 wetlands and 120-foot setback from category 3 wetlands. Provide a little bit more detail about our conservation development code. If that's not a term that you're familiar with, it's a style of development where that helps preserve open space helps to preserve large portions of open space by using a different distribution of lots. So instead of having a little bit of open space on each lot, as would be the case in a traditional development, the lots in a conservation development are smaller, and then there is a larger area of pooled open space. This style of development results in less infrastructure to maintain. It can be done through a planned use development code or as a zoning overlay. And if you're interested in this, I suggest you check out our model code. You may be wondering, why does CRWP have a parking code? What does that have to do with streams or stormwater management? Well, there's a direct relationship between the amount of parking that is required in your community and the amount of impervious surface in your community. So we developed a model parking code that includes language that communities can use to make sure that their existing regulations are allowing for permeable paving materials, shared parking, and land banking. And if land banking isn't a term that you're familiar with, that means allowing land to be set aside so that it can be used in the future as parking if needed, but in the meantime, it can be natural vegetation or a landscaped area. And we also suggest that communities allow landscaping to be used as stormwater management. So that means not requiring mounding within required landscape, parking lot landscaping, but instead allowing that area to be depressed to be used as a bioretention cell if desired. We also suggest that communities look at the number of parking spaces that they are requiring to make sure that they are not requiring more parking spaces than are really needed, and to consider the use of parking maximums and consider reducing the width of parking stalls and aisles to reduce the amount of impervious cover in the community. CRWP thinks that codes are great tools. You can use them to reduce the costs of private development to public infrastructure and to avoid problems upfront rather than fixing them later. Furthermore, if you're an MS4 community, you're required to have stormwater codes anyway, so you might as well make them do as much work as possible for your community. Speaking of requiring to have stormwater codes, if you're an MS4 community, you should be aware that if you need to update your comprehensive stormwater and erosion sediment controls codes by April 1st of 2022. How would you know if you need to update your comprehensive stormwater and erosion sediment control code? Well, if you're using our model, you should update your codes. If you're not, here are some other things to consider. The construction and the latest construction general permit the water quality volume changed. So it increased from 0.75 to 0.9 inches, and there is now a new water quality volume calculation, which appears on your screen. If your old code has the old water quality volume and the old water quality volume calculation spelled out in it, you need to update your ordinance to be compliant with the new MS4 permit. Generally, if you spelled out everything in the construction general permit in your ordinance, you probably need to do updates to both of your codes to be compliant. If you didn't, here are some other things to think about. These are some general guidelines for what your erosion sediment control and stormwater codes need to have in them to be compliant with MS4 permits. Your ordinance needs to allow you to require submission of a stormwater pollution prevention plan that meets the requirements in the construction general permit. At least you can go above that, but at least needs to meet those requirements. It needs to give you the authority to inspect those sites. It needs to ensure that there is a mechanism that inspection and maintenance will continue for the stormwater control measures that are required to be designed and installed. You have to make sure that your ordinance says that not only do you have to come up with a plan, but those BMPs and SCMs actually need to be installed and functioning on the site. Your ordinance needs to have enforceable requirements and timelines, and you need to have penalties for non-compliance. If you don't think your ordinance has any of these things, then it's probably a good idea to revisit it and update it this cycle. So one tool that you can use to help you with that update is CRWP's Model Comprehensive Stormwater Code. Ohio EPA recommends the use of this model code for phase 2 compliance, and it's widely used throughout Northeast Ohio. This model was first issued in 2004 with updates each permit cycle since then. It's a collaborative effort of CRWP, Cuyahoga Lake and Geauga Soil and Water Conservation Districts, and CRWP member communities. And has also benefited from insight and comments from ODNR and Ohio EPA. And the early versions of this code were informed by John Aldridge, who's a consulting engineer. So we really think that a lot of the reason that this code is a good model is that we have incorporated the good ideas from all of our collaborators we have on this slide. Our model is very thorough. All of the section headings appear on this slide, and I'm going to take a little bit of time and give you a little bit of idea for what is contained in each section of our model code. The purpose and scope section is a brief overview of the overarching objectives of the legislation. The definition section in our model code now references all of the definitions in the construction general permit, and then we define additional key terms in the ordinance that are not defined in the construction general permit. We also define the construction general permit, since we're now using that term to reference Ohio EPA's construction general permit for our code. We include a disclaimer of liability and conflict severability and nuisances and responsibility section. We have a development of comprehensive stormwater plans section that states when plans are required. We have an applications procedures section that lays out submittal requirements and states that a pre-application meeting is required. We have a section that states that plans need to include proof of compliance with state and federal regulations. That includes an NOI for the coverage under the construction general permit, as well as any needed 401, 404, 401 isolated wetlands or ephemeral stream permits for the site, and compliance with Ohio's dam safety regulations if applicable. The section on comprehensive stormwater management plan states that the plans need to include all of the required components detailed in the construction general permit. And we also say that plans need to now include either the runoff reduction calculator from Ohio EPA's website or the water quality volume compliance calculator spreadsheet from Ohio EPA's website. And then we have additional standards that need to be included for water quantity management and calculations to back that up. The performance standards section goes into more detail about the criteria for the stormwater control measures that need to be designed and installed for the site, which include that stormwater control measures need to be designed per the standards in the Rainwater and Land Development Manual. The alternative actions section states that if site constraints make it difficult to have a stormwater control measure on a site, then that stormwater control measure can instead be placed off-site if Ohio EPA approves that. The installation of water quality stormwater control measures section states that for water quality stormwater control measures such as bioretention that would be degraded by construction site sediment, runoff cannot be diverted to those water quality stormwater control measures until the entire area tributary to that water quality stormwater control measure has been stabilized. The easement section of the code states that one of the plan requirements is that the property owner needs to grant the city an easement for the footprint of the stormwater control measure itself, as well as a 25-foot band around it, as well as a 25-foot access way between the stormwater control measure and the right of way, and that easement needs to be included in the inspection and maintenance agreement. The reason for that is so that the city can have adequate access to the stormwater control measure to conduct ongoing inspections and to conduct any maintenance if the property owner fails to do that in the future. The maintenance and final inspection and approval section states that in order for the stormwater control measures to be approved, the property owner needs to submit an as-built survey and inspection report that is certified by a PE stating that the stormwater control measures as installed meet the requirements of the design plan submitted as part of the stormwater control measure, the comprehensive stormwater plan. The ongoing inspections section states that the property owner needs to conduct ongoing inspections of the stormwater control measures on their property, and that the city also has the authority to conduct ongoing inspections of those stormwater control measures. And the fees section states that the property owner needs to pay the city applicable fees for review and filing of the comprehensive stormwater management plan, as well as inspection fees prior to the city reviewing the comprehensive stormwater plan. And the bond section states that the property owner needs to have a bond for 10% of the total project cost in place before the comprehensive stormwater plan is reviewed. The violation section states that no one should violate this ordinance. The penalty section states a fine and imprisonment penalty for violating this ordinance. And the appeals section states that property owners can appeal grievances about this ordinance to the Court of Common Appeals. Our model ordinance addresses both water quantity and water quality. So a lot of what I discussed so far deals with water quality, but our ordinance also has language about conveyance. Our ordinance states that open channel conveyance is preferred whenever possible, and it does have some language about storm sewer sizing for sites for which open channel conveyance is not feasible. We also have stream crossing standard language that includes things like bridges shall be the preferred crossing for high quality sensitive streams. Our code also requires an inspection, maintenance agreement, and plan. Our code uses the critical storm method for peak discharge management. And for anyone not familiar, this is a method that was published in ODNR's Stormwater Manual in 1980 that states that the peak discharge post-development shall be no greater for the critical storm, and every more frequent storm should be no greater than the pre-development 1 year, 24-hour storm. And the critical storm is determined by how much the volume increases post-development relative to pre-development. You might be wondering, why would my community choose to go above and beyond what's required by Ohio EPA in our stormwater ordinance? Well, if you're wondering that, and your storm sewers look like the upper left portion, or your streets look like some of the pictures here, you might consider that you have some opportunity to get some additional stormwater storage done in your stormwater system by adding some requirements to your regulations that are above and beyond the state regulations. And many communities feel like this is cost effective because other strategies such as storm sewer replacement can be very costly and very disruptive to communities. Furthermore, some communities, even if they're not currently having flooding problems, would like their storm systems to be as robust as possible because they've seen an increase in the amount and frequency of heavy storm events. This slide shows data from the Great Lakes Integrated Sciences and Assessment Center, or GLISA, that shows that the period of 1981 to 2010 relative to the period of 1951 to 1980 saw a 22% increase in the amount of rain falling in the heaviest rain events and a 16% increase in the number of the heaviest rain events. So one way that you can get more stormwater management done on private property using your code is to require stormwater control measures for post-construction for sites that are just disturbed less than 1 acre. And this map just shows a visual representation of how that could add up if each of these parcels are less than 1 acre, and as they're redeveloped, if they all have a stormwater control measure added in, then you're getting that much more work done and that much more stormwater storage in your system than you had before. If you're wondering, has anybody else required stormwater management at less than the 1 acre threshold? The answer is yes. Locally, the city of Willoughby Hills and the city of Aurora, Ohio, both require that all industrial and commercial development that requires a site plan complete a comprehensive stormwater management plan and install stormwater control measures. Additionally, the city of Lakewood requires a comprehensive stormwater management plan for site disturbance greater than 8,000 square feet. And you can see that if you look nationally, there are many communities that have even lower thresholds at which stormwater control measures are required. If you have been using our model comprehensive stormwater code and you're curious about what changed from 2016 to 2020, these are the major changes. The first is that our code now references the Ohio EPA construction general permit and its successors rather than spelling everything out in the construction general permit. We made this change primarily because the time frame that communities have to update their codes has shortened with this MS4 permit from 2 years to 1 year. And at the stage of the draft MS4 permit, Ohio EPA was considering giving communities only 6 months to update their codes. And we know it's very difficult for communities to complete ordinance updates on those timeframes. So we wanted to make our code such that it minimizes the amount of updates required in the future. And another benefit of this change is that there will no longer be a lag between changes to the state regulations and local regulations. So for example, right now, in a lot of communities, the local regulations say that you must manage a water quality volume of 0.75 inches of rain, whereas the state regulations say 0.9, and this change will automatically make those types of changes consistent. Another change that we made to our code was including something in our performance standards section that will meet the requirement for MS4s that have TSS and nutrient TMDLs for MCM5 by requiring green infrastructure where feasible. So communities that have total suspended solids or sediment or any nutrient TMDL are required under this MS4 permit to do one of four things. They can either require developers to use green infrastructure for water quality treatment where feasible. They can retrofit a flood control basin to provide detention of the water quality volume. They can restore 300 feet or more of streams, or they can treat an acre or more of impervious surface that was existing before 2003 using green infrastructure. So if you use our model code or components of it, you adopt our language, you will automatically meet the requirements that you do one of those four things, because your code will require green infrastructure where feasible. And what we mean by green infrastructure is the table 4B practices and the construction general permit that include bioretention, permeable pavement, infiltration trenches, infiltration basins, and underground storage with infiltration or other green infrastructure. We also changed the required freeboard for stormwater ponds from 1 feet to 2 feet in our model code. We did this to help make communities more resilient to increasing precipitation events. Now moving on to our model erosion and sediment control code. Like the comprehensive stormwater code, Ohio EPA recommends the use of this code for phase 2 compliance. It is widely used throughout Northeast Ohio. It now also references the Ohio EPA construction general permit and its successors, and it was updated in 2020 to reflect the current construction general permit and MS4 permit requirements. The first version of this code was issued in 2001. It's a collaborative effort of Chagrin Watershed partners, like Soil and Water Conservation District, and member communities. It's been reviewed by Ohio EPA for phase 2 compliance. And like our comprehensive stormwater code, this code has really benefited from suggestions and insight from all of our collaborators on the code. Again, our model erosion sediment control code is very thorough. The section headers appear on this slide. The purpose and scope section states the overarching goals of the legislation. The definitions section references all of the definitions in the construction general permit. It defines the construction general permit, and it defines other key terms in the ordinance that are not defined in the construction general permit. We again have a disclaimer section. We have a development of stormwater pollution prevention plans section that states when plans are required to be submitted. We have an applications procedures section that states that a pre-application meeting is required and the submittal requirements. We have a section on compliance with state and federal regulations that requires that the plan include evidence that the site has submitted its NOI for construction general permit coverage and has any needed 401, 404 isolated wetlands and ephemeral stream permits from Ohio and the Corps, as well as compliance with the dam safety regulations if applicable. The stormwater pollution prevention plan section states that the SWIP at least needs to meet the requirements outlined in the construction general permit. And we also state that the plan needs to include a filled out sediment.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Basin, a sediment basin compliance worksheet. The performance standards section goes into additional detail about the standards for the required BMPs, including that BMPs need to be designed and installed per rainwater and land development. The abbreviated stormwater pollution prevention plan section states that sites that disturb between 1/10 and 1 acre need to submit an abbreviated stormwater pollution prevention plan.
Hey, Mike, I'm on a video conference and I'm waiting for my family physician.
And that section states that you need to have certain minimum BMPs for your abbreviated stormwater pollution prevention plan that include silt fence or other perimeter control. You need to do stabilization, you need to do street sweeping, you need to have a construction entrance. And the fees section states that the property owner needs to submit applicable review, filing, and inspection fees prior to the city reviewing the SWIP. The bond section states that the property owner needs to file a bond prior to review of the SWIP. The enforcement section states that the city has the ability to issue a stop work order if the construction activity is not in compliance with this ordinance, as well as providing the community the ability to issue fines for violations, and those fines increase with increasing numbers of violations. The violations section states that no one should violate this ordinance, and the penalty section states that the city can issue fines or imprisonment if anyone violates this ordinance. And the appeals section states that this can be appealed through the Court of Common Appeals. The main changes that we made to our model erosion sediment control code from 2020 compared to 2016 are on this slide. Like the comprehensive stormwater permit, we are now referencing, like the comprehensive stormwater code, we are now referencing the Ohio EPA construction general permit and its successors in our model erosion sediment control code. And these are for the same reasons. We wanted to make it easier for communities to have to do updates less frequently, and we wanted consistency between local and state regulations. Our code now also includes mechanized clearing as a trigger for a SWIP, and we removed the agricultural exemption. We did this because we learned that some soil and water conservation districts were treating mechanized clearing as a silvicultural harvest under the agricultural rules, whereas Ohio EPA considers mechanized clearing to be the first step in the development process. So we changed our code to align with Ohio EPA's guidance. We also added that property owners need to submit a SWIP for offsite support facilities, such as spoil locations or asphalt plants, before they start using such offsite support facilities. And we added that a portion of the bond will be retained until the site is permanently stabilized. We also added a section in our code that relates to the requirement that in the MS4 permit, that MS4s need to conduct inspections every 14 days instead of monthly if sites have certain deficiencies. And those deficiencies are construction activities have started at the site with no SWIP completed, or the property owner has failed to install the sediment basin when the SWIP clearly indicates that that should be the first step, or they have failed to implement any sediment or erosion controls, or dewatering activities are resulting in turbid discharges. And because MS4s now have to inspect those sites more frequently, we added language in our code that allows MS4s to pass those costs on to the property owner by having them pay a $250 additional fee for each additional inspection, and that needs to be conducted because of those issues on the site. The last code I'm going to be covering in detail today is our riparian setback model code. As a reminder, riparian setbacks count as a post-construction BMP under MCM 5 for phase 2 compliance for MS4s. I'm going to begin by reminding all of you of some of the services that healthy riparian areas provide. Healthy riparian areas have root systems for trees and bushes that help to hold stream bank soils in place, limiting stream bank erosion. They also help to reduce downstream flood impacts by slowing water velocity and enabling water to soak into the ground on the floodplains. They filter and trap sediment, nutrients, chemicals, salts, septic discharge, and other pollutants, and they protect surface and groundwater quality by acting as filters. They influence temperature by providing shade, which can be particularly important for cold water streams, but important for all streams. They help to reduce aquatic nuisance species, and they help to enhance wildlife habitat and biodiversity. This graph shows that the types of services that riparian buffers provide increase with increasing buffer width. However, even at relatively small widths, the stream still benefits from stream bank stabilization and water temperature moderation. And riparian setbacks are a local zoning tool that functions similar to traditional side, rear, and front lot setbacks by dictating where on a parcel a structure can be located. They're a preventative and cost-effective alternative that minimizes the need for stormwater infrastructure and engineered solutions. And they're justifiable in terms of protection of public health and safety. I'm sure many of you are aware of situations where houses have been built too close to streams and structure flooding and potentially loss of life have resulted, or structures have been endangered because of stream bank erosion. But adopting riparian setbacks allows communities to maintain the free services that riparian areas can provide as land is being developed. So communities with riparian setbacks continue to get benefits for flood and erosion control and water quality improvement, even as development occurs. They lower the cost to residents and communities by keeping homes and other infrastructure out of the path of ever-changing streams, as well as reducing public health and safety concerns from flooding and structural damage from erosion, which in turn reduces the need for costly stream bank stabilization projects, like is shown on the left picture there. And that right picture shows just one of the many examples of structure flooding occurring from a house that was built too close to a stream. Sometimes communities worry that implementing riparian setbacks will lower property values in their communities, but the research shows that that is not true. In fact, some studies show that implementing riparian setbacks actually increases property values in a community. Our model setbacks are based on the drainage area of each stream. So our model states that a stream that drains less than a half square mile and has a defined bed and bank has a 25-foot setback measured from the edge of the stream outward in both directions. Streams that drain between a half mile and 20 square miles have a 75-foot setback, and streams that drain between 20 and 300 square miles have a 120-foot setback. And our model extends that setback to the outer edge of any wetlands that intersect the riparian setback and the outer edge of a 100-year FEMA floodplain. Our model includes a listing of activities that are permitted, prohibited, and conditional uses under this regulation. So for example, riparian revegetation, the top picture, is a permitted use, whereas a stream bank stabilization project, such as installing a bendway weir, would be a conditional use that could be reviewed and approved with a permit from Planning and Zoning Commission. Our model does not apply to existing structures that were in existence prior to the riparian setback being in place. Sometimes people worry that it's going to require houses that are already too close to streams to be torn down, but that's not the case. Those existing uses are grandfathered. We do recommend that communities provide variances to other setbacks first, so that they would first flex side, front, and rear setbacks to maintain the riparian setbacks. So this picture is an example of a community that did just that. They had riparian setbacks and they flexed their front setback, allowed their house to be built a little closer to the road than it otherwise would be to maintain the riparian setback and to prevent future damage to that structure from flooding and erosion. This slide just provides a little bit more detail about how pre-existing buildings and structures are affected by riparian and wetland setback regulations using our model. Our model would allow expansions of homes that don't encroach further in the setback, but if a property owner wanted to encroach further into the setback with an addition, that would require a variance. If a property owner tore down their home and wanted to build a new one, they would need a variance to put that structure back where it was if it was within the riparian setback, and they would need to show that there was no other logical location where the new home could be built on the parcel in order to get that variance. CRWP recommends that communities create and make publicly available guide maps when they adopt riparian setbacks. This map, the figure is an example map that we prepared for one of our member communities. We suggest that communities use the best available data when they are creating those maps, but to also include language that indicates that the map is a guide only and field conditions always prevail. And we suggest that communities update their maps as needed if they become aware of discrepancies between field conditions and the maps. I'd like to thank you again for the opportunity to present to all of you today, and I'd like to take any questions at this time.
Keely, there looks like there's one question in the chat, and it reads, is the amount of $250 listed somewhere in the new permit for penalty
No.
of the new MCM4 guidelines?
No, the MS4 permit does not require you to charge a fee for doing the additional inspections. It just requires you to inspect more frequently. We just added language to our model that allows you to recoup those costs. If you don't like that, you could take that out when you adopt your ordinance. Are there any other questions?
Yes, I have one question. In a riparian setback, if there's a bunch of down trees, sediment that has built up and kind of dammed off the flow of natural water through the riparian setback, is it permissible to go in and just to have those trees, debris removed out of it, or do you have to go through the Army Corps and permitting process for that type of work?
You would always need to get any applicable federal and state permits before you completed that work, even if you have local regulations as well. And additionally, depending on the nature of the work, for example, if your community adopted our model riparian ordinance and there was a stream bank stabilization process component of the work that was being done, you may also need a local permit from Planning and Zoning Commission.
Okay, so it wouldn't just fall underneath a normal maintenance to pull out the down trees and debris that's behind it?
I think that question is if you're just removing accumulated woody debris, you wouldn't necessarily, and you're not doing a stream bank stabilization project, you wouldn't necessarily need a variance from planning and zoning under our model code. It sounds like you also have a question about whether the Corps would require that, and I am not the expert in 404. I mean, I have some experience, but I think I would defer with this many people on the call. If there is someone from the Corps or the state who would like to answer those state requirements, they can feel free to answer the question about what the state and federal requirements are.
This is Mayor Hunter. I just wanted to thank you for the conference. I must move on. I got another meeting at noon. Thank you for the information, and make sure that I get sent out a copy of today's event was well presented. Thank you very much.
Okay, Keely, there was one other question. You mentioned increasing the freeboard from 1 foot to 2 feet. Do you have any language or recommendations for freeboard from underground detention?
We didn't change that in our model in any respect. I certainly don't think it hurts to increase to require additional detention as a precaution for increasing precipitation, but we didn't specifically change that in our model.
Okay, and also is educating contractors part of the rolling out of the new model ordinance?
Well, this event is open to a wide variety of participants. I don't know if we have any contractors with us today. CRWP often upon request does educational events with our member communities. And that's something that communities can certainly undertake as they update their ordinances if they think that that would be helpful in their communities.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you for your presentation. That's all the questions that we have received. But so in conclusion, on behalf of the Ohio Stormwater Association, I would like to thank our sponsors. We want to thank our platinum sponsor, our gold level sponsors, and also our silver level sponsors. Also, we have opportunities. If anyone that is participating would like to sponsor, please contact someone either in the Ohio Stormwater Association or one of our board members. We invite you once again to get involved and volunteer to be on one of our committees. Also, just to mention an upcoming webinar on November 11th, same time at 11, we are going to discuss utility scale solar site construction stormwater management with Barry Fagan, and we'll send out registration information regarding this webinar. Also, just to wrap up, we'd like to thank our speaker and our hosts, both Keely Davidson-Bennett and Dana Oleskowitz with WAMO. And that is all we have for today. There was a question regarding if professional development is available for today's presentation. And yes, we will provide that information to everyone. Is there anything else that you have, Keely?
No, thank you again for this opportunity to present.
No, and that ends our presentation. Thank you.